Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, Better Buildings webinar, where we will be talking about the Clean Energy to Communities program, which is connecting communities to free technical assistance. Next slide, please. Thank you again for coming. I will talk through just the speaker introductions, who we have joining us today, and I'll provide an overview of the C2C program, highlighting 2 of the 3 offerings specifically. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time hearing from the unincorporated Norcross community, represented by Marvin Lim here, and some of my colleagues at NREL and at SIA, who did some great work on the expert match request for this community. And then we'll round out with just high-level information on applying to C2C, and then a Q&A session at the end for any questions you might have as we've been presenting on the program. So Anna, could you show the next poll question? Right, so we just have a few poll questions here to get a sense of who's attending today and to allow us to curate what we speak today as much as possible to who's in the room, the virtual room. So the first question asked the regions you're representing, and then also this question is the specific type of organization you're representing today. Okay, maybe we can go to the final question. Thank you. And the final question is just, what is the general focus of your work? We're trying to get a sense of where in the building sector you work in specifically. Great. Thanks, Anna. We can go to the next slide and get started with the webinar. So welcome. Thank you everyone for coming today. We are very excited to be presenting on C2C today. It's a program that launched several months ago, and that there are many different ways we've been working with communities over the last several months. And we appreciate the time to speak to the work we've been doing and how it might relate to some of your ongoing buildings efforts. So in the next slide is an overview of the speakers today. From unincorporated Norcross, we have Marvin Lim, who is a community representative and also representing Lucky Shoals Community Association. We have William Bryan, a director of research from the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, SIA. We have Shanti Pless, a commercial buildings expert at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. We have Alexander Kramer, an expert match community lead who led the relationship and the whole TA process, coordinated that effort. Also from NREL, and myself, I'm a researcher and program manager here at NREL, and the program manager for the C2C expert match program specifically. Next slide, please. So I'll start with an overview of what C2C is as a program and touch specifically on 2 of the 3 offerings under the program. Next slide. So C2C stands for Clean Energy to Communities, and it is a new program that is connecting communities to technical expertise from several national labs and a few additional technical assistance providers. And the aim is to really connect communities to expertise to help them achieve their clean energy goals. The program is cross-cutting in nature. The technical assistance provided spans multiple sectors, some of which are highlighted here. So we have clean power, mobility, grid, and buildings. And all of the assistance we're providing is really couched within local or regional priorities. So whether those are local clean energy goals, jobs and economic development priorities, climate resilience and mitigation, or energy and environmental justice, the assistance provided under this program aims to address technical questions within that broader local context. The program is funded by the Department of Energy and managed by NREL. But in this work, we're working with 4 other national labs: Argonne National Lab, Oak Ridge National Lab, Pacific Northwest, the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Next slide, please. So there are three main ways communities can engage under this program. I will briefly touch on them in this slide, but in subsequent slides, I will provide more information on the cohorts and expert match specifically. So there are three main offerings under this program: in-depth technical partnerships, cohorts, and expert match. In-depth technical partnerships is a multi-year partnership where a community team consisting of local government, community-based organizations, and utilities work alongside National Lab staff on cross-cutting and robust technical questions. And also there is the opportunity to do testing and validation of potential scenarios and strategies before full technology deployment. Cohorts, also known as peer learning cohorts, really connects communities around different technical topics. So it's an opportunity for communities to learn in a collaborative environment and get training and access to different best practices to help them overcome challenges around that specific cohort topic. And then there's Expert Match, which is the major focus of this webinar today, which provides short-term, no-cost technical assistance to communities that have a near-term clean energy question, or there's an upcoming decision that they would like to make and would benefit from some really high quality, high level technical expertise. So the next slide summarizes the duration, reach, and outcomes of each of the three offerings. So in-depth technical partnerships will run for about 3 years and work with around 4 communities. Some of the main outcomes will be some really detailed, in-depth multi-sectoral modeling and analysis, and some of the validation of technologies to mitigate risk. Cohorts runs on a 6-month cycle and is working with around 100 communities, and some of the outcomes are best practices, strategies, and also an opportunity for relationship building with peers across the country that are working on similar questions and have some similar challenges and barriers as they're trying to build out clean energy projects in their various communities. And then finally, Expert Match runs on a 3-month cycle, one-on-one technical assistance with communities. We're working with up to 200 communities per year, and we provide that kind of really one-on-one technical assistance, whether that's in the form of research and analysis, modeling and analysis, connecting communities to the right stakeholders, and so on and so forth, to inform near-term decisions or to better position communities for upcoming opportunities. So the next several slides provide more detail on cohorts and expert match specifically, as those are both underway. In-depth technical partnership will be formally launching in the next several weeks, but we're also happy to answer any high-level questions you have about that offering during the Q&A session. So next slide. So in terms of cohorts, this is just a recap of some of what I mentioned on the previous slide, but there are approximately about 3 cohort topics per cycle. And so cohorts launch in January and July, and each month communities meet and they might get training on some user-friendly tools, get access to some of the experts and practitioners around the technical topic, and again, get to learn in a collaborative environment around a specific technical topic. In terms of eligibility, local governments, utilities, community-based organizations can apply to be part of a specific cohorts, and the evaluation committee reviews applications and selects 8 to 15 communities to participate in each cohort. So they're set around 3 topics per cohort cycle. The next cohort cycle will be launching in January, but applications will be opening around September 18th. So if you or a community you work with are interested in cohorts, we encourage you to visit the website shown on the slide below. So nrel.gov/c2c/cohorts will give you information on this offering and kind of how to apply once applications open in around September. Next slide is a summary of previous cohort topics. So the first cohort cycle launched at the beginning of the year. There are 3 topics, one around starting on the pathway to 100% clean energy, another on accelerating the deployment of equitable grid-friendly EV charging infrastructure, a third on financing strategies for a more equitable energy future. And then the current cohort cycle, which is running through December, had 3 topics as well, one on planning and funding for EV charging infrastructure deployment, and another on implementing a municipal clean energy procurement strategy. And finally, the last cohort is on incorporating community voices into clean energy planning and deployment. So in terms of how these topics are picked, a lot of the topics, or all of the topics, were really informed by several months, and in some cases up to 2 years of stakeholder engagement with different communities across the country. We met with community representatives one-on-one and got a sense of, these are the pressing questions we have. And based on that, we are developing cohort topics and materials based on that input. So in the next cycle launching in January, there will be at least one topic related to buildings, whether that's on decarbonization and energy efficiency, or thinking about renewable energy options in terms of storage and microgrids for municipal sites. So hopefully there are a few people on this call where cohorts might make sense for your organization. And again, invite you to visit the website for more information. So now switching gears to Expert Match. On the next slide is kind of an overview, more information on the Expert Match program. I mentioned it is a short-term technical assistance option. So you have a near-term decision, or would also like that really one-on-one technical assistance. We are providing 40 to 60 hours of free technical assistance to a community from the first kickoff call. And so there are many different questions we're answering right now. There are about 40 plus communities we're working with under Expert Match. And some of those questions are in clean electricity, buildings, mobility, grid, and kind of some are more related to financing. And some also have elements or have central focus on energy and environmental justice priorities. And here as well, if you'd like more information, please visit the Expert Match website, nrl.gov/T2C/expert match. On the next slide is just a high-level example of the first pilot community under Expert Match. We worked with Co-Host New York, which is a small working-class community in upstate New York that had limited resources and especially kind of really limited energy-related expertise. But the city wanted to reduce its climate impact, but its municipal buildings were old and many of the state roofs were not suitable for solar panels. So they started looking at alternative decarbonization opportunities. And so we provided technical assistance in two areas. One was around reviewing proposals for reducing emissions and evaluating technology options for retrofitting its historic buildings, because most of the municipal buildings are historic buildings. And then second was related to technical assistance around the city considering a floating solar project on its water treatment reservoir. And we provided that technical assistance sometime last year. And since then, on both of these fronts, the assistance provided has helped inform upcoming decisions. So on the historic building side of things, the energy retrofits are underway, and the decisions made there were informed by our review of the different kind of retrofit options they were considering. And on the second piece, the floating solar piece, it's been a long process kind of working on that project because it aims to be the first municipally owned and operated floating solar project in the US. I was one of the experts on that request, and it's been a really great opportunity to work with a community trying to build this project. And in the last few weeks, they actually just got their final permitting approval. So they expect construction on the project to commence sometime next year. So at this juncture, I will hand it over to the Unincorporated Norcross team, Marvin, William, Shanti, and Alex, to talk through this case study specifically, and look forward to the discussion after on any questions you might have related to C2C overall or the Unincorporated Norcross work specifically.
All right, thanks so much. My name is Alexandra Kramer. I was the coordinator or community lead for this project. It was really awesome to work with this team on a really innovative idea and community-led initiative. So with that, I'll pass it off to Marvin to introduce us to his community and talk a little bit more about what brought him to this program. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. I am Marvin Lim. I am CEO and founder, as you see there, of a community-based organization and nonprofit, the Lucky Shoals Community Association. I also am a state representative for this area, Unincorporated Norcross. That is Gwinnett County. It's in the Metro Atlanta. It includes 3 cities. And I am so grateful for this program And when Secretary Granholm was here in Atlanta about a month and a half ago, I was able to talk with her as well as Representative Nikema Williams and talk about, in the span of 3 months, how grateful and useful C2C and NREL have been to get these resources and this very much needed knowledge to this community. Next slide. So just a little bit more about this community. You see on the map there where we are in Metro Atlanta, and specifically where this community is. And it's very interesting because when I talk about this community to folks who might know what Gwinnett County is the second most populous and most diverse or most non-white county in the 159 counties of the state of Georgia. And it is generally well resourced. But my area is both the most diverse of an already diverse county. It's about 87% minorities, about 50% immigrants, a lot of diversity within that diversity. But on the flip side, it is quite under-resourced. 25% of the people are at or below federal poverty levels. All of the census tracts in this community are designated as federally disadvantaged by the White House climate screening tool, by DOE's tools on energy burdens, by EPA's EJ screen, by HUD, the plurality of the county's qualified census tracts. And for this, we do have a lot of needs, as you can tell from that. For Expert Match, really wanted to focus on the fact that we have a lot of heavy industry zoned next to residential areas. Next slide, please. Yes, and what that has turned into is we have dilapidated real estate offerings, often not even tax revenue generating for the county government. And it causes a lot of issues because so much of it is not kept up. So that causes code enforcement and other issues for residents. But on the long term, it's also created problems attracting businesses here. The Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce, when it launched a report on kind of the challenges and opportunities for the county, this was the #1 thing they identified for the county, and that is especially true in this particular area. So what that also means for longer term commercial or just community and economic development is in general is that we are often left reacting to those who might have interest in the area, who are more often than not seeking to rezone in ways that are not particularly efficient or beneficial. I think an example of that is we have a lot of office space that's been sought to be converted to gas stations or convenience stores with fuel pumps. And anyone can tell you here, we have plenty of those. But when you talk to the property owners, they talk again about how they've had trouble attracting businesses. So we identified that as a problem. And I also say it's not just we identified that from talking to a few people. We've talked to a lot of folks here. And what you discover here is for people, there is a lot of interest in energy efficiency in these technologies, but there's often a perceived high barrier to entry. I'm sure a lot of you have that experience. And in this community, unlike in many communities, especially in the Metro Atlanta area, there has not been one business that has been leading the way. We simply have not had that, but there is interest. So among, let's see, there's a lot of hotels and extended stays here, a lot of construction and manufacturing facilities and warehouses. And as I mentioned, a lot of gas stations, essentially. From all of those that we've spoken to, there is recognition that there is potential. But on the flip side, even when it comes to, the low-hanging fruit, least costly stuff, so we're not even talking about perhaps more advanced technology like solar EV. We're talking basic energy efficiency that could result in long-term savings. There's interest in that, but particularly from small to mid-sized businesses, often minority-owned, often immigrant-owned, it's clear to me that there's a lot of room for education on new technologies, contractors, sources of funding, and particularly with all of the investments at the federal level, it's created a situation where there's almost an overwhelmed feeling. And I also say on the governmental side, being in an unincorporated area, I'm speaking about the county government, our government has had trouble even when there has been, say, formula funding in terms of EECBG and other funding. So in other arenas like housing and infrastructure, say roads and water, there has been arguably much more interest and ways forward to develop clean energy in those contexts. But again, because of the way things are zoned here and because of the lack of resources thus far on these commercial areas, we applied and took the initiative to apply for C2C, focusing on that. And we are not and have not been at a shovel-ready project. We've been several steps away from that. And we actually discovered that when we co-applied for a DOE RACER grant last fall, which we just weren't ready for. Obviously, we didn't get it. But from that and from the work that we'd previously done with CF, for which I'm particularly grateful, we knew there was a lot of potential and interest. But it's to get from, okay, we have some data, we know there's potential and interest, we've talked to members of the community, to actual project readiness. There are many steps in between, and that's what we really tapped into with C2C. I'll also say Better Buildings has been an incredible resource for this community. That's something that I made our community improvement district aware of. And what C2C has allowed us to do is to take several more significant steps further into really actualizing things. And I'm really grateful for C2C for really taking the direction of this community. And we'll talk about the next steps a little bit later. Next slide, please. And just settling on here, what we've been working on with a variety of different folks is to pull it all together, because we do have a large construction industry here, but we found that a lot of folks in that construction industry they don't have the certifications, they don't have the know-how to do projects in their own district. And working with them, working with the business owners, we really hope to be able to take this to actual, again, project readiness, because there is just too much potential to sit on. But when you have so many resources, again, it can be a glut. And that's what C2C has allowed us in the commercial context to take those steps forward. And with that, I will turn it over to the next person.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. So my name is Will Bryan. I'm the Director of Research at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. We've been working with Marvin for several years now. This is kind of one piece of, I think, that broader initiative that Marvin was really speaking to. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach in this project. Before I do that, I'll just give a quick rundown of CF. We're a regional energy efficiency nonprofit 501c3. We serve 11 states throughout the Southeast and 5 U.S. island territories. We provide a number of services. Primarily we're operating kind of at a policy level, but we're doing a lot of work specifically around supporting communities and helping them get access to federal funding at the moment. But we do that through research, through our consultation and education, program management. We facilitate conversations with various stakeholders in our region to try to kind of bring them all together into the same room. And then we also provide some financial services and expertise on grant writing and funding, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. And really for this project was very commercial focused, and the goal really was to kind of understand what the opportunities for energy efficiency and clean energy improvements were in the commercial building stock of unincorporated Norcross. We had previously done some work on the residential building stock, which really kind of dominates the area, but there's a really significant amount of kind of commercial building space. And so we wanted to really kind of start with an understanding of just what are those buildings and, really dig into what their needs are before we began engaging with the community improvement district and the business owners and Georgia Power and others to actually kind of build a coalition that can bring about changes. So really one of the first things we did for this was to dig into permit data going back about a decade. And we were lucky to have a partner in the county that was willing to supply this data for us. And what we found was, both in the permit and parcel data that we looked at, that storage warehouses really are the dominant form of commercial buildings in the district. There are about 146 storage warehouses, relatively small by comparison, about 39,000 square feet, so not as large as some of the newer storage warehouses. And these are mostly, kind of 3 to 4 decades old. And that's followed by retail space, about 67 retail establishments for a little over 1 million square feet of building space. Office space, discount stores, shopping centers, supermarkets, and hotels kind of round out the top few. And the idea was really to kind of understand, in these key commercial building categories, what does energy use look like and what upgrades are needed moving forward. So next slide, please. So we mapped this out just to kind of get a sense of what the district looked like from a buildings standpoint. And here you can see these are both building kind of building footprints and the parcels themselves. You can see most of the commercial building space in Marvin's district is really kind of clustered along Interstate 85, which is really that kind of topmost boundary that you see there. And the rest is really dominated by residential. But again, some of the issues that Marvin was speaking to kind of at the outset, I think are pretty evident in just how these, these spaces are kind of clustered on top of each other. And, when we're thinking kind of big picture, I mean, there's a lot of impervious surface, there's a lot of urban heat island impacts from, concrete and buildings. And so anything we can do to mitigate the climate impacts of that, to break that up a bit, but also to bring some efficiency to those buildings, I think is a real gain for the district. Next slide, please. And so when we looked at a decade of permit data, we sort of got a sense of what was going on and what building owners, what decisions they were making in terms of upgrading their building stock. And I think, the bottom line really was not much. I think these are largely small businesses. There's not a lot of available capital that business owners have to upgrade their building stock or upgrade their kind of technologies in the buildings. And so I think there's a lot of room for efficiency gains that could reduce operating costs in the district and then, mitigate climate impacts as well. So just a few examples of that. We found that across hundreds of commercial buildings, there were only 18 commercial permits for re-roofing since 2010. You can kind of get a sense of what those look like there. There were really only 15 HVAC replacements or permits pulled for HVAC replacements since 2010. 4 commercial permits for water heater replacements, and then 2 permits for lighting upgrades. And really only one of those was more efficient lighting, and that was in a government office building. Next slide, please. And then, kind of looking specifically at clean energy and electric vehicle technology, which was another, piece of the puzzle that we were considering here, how we drive the adoption of those in the district. We found that there is one public EV charger in the district, and 2 commercial permits have been pulled for the installation of an EV charger on kind of private property since 2010. And one of those includes a shopping center that is kind of available for personal vehicles as well, for the people who are shopping there. And there's one building in the district that has rooftop solar currently, one commercial building in the district, and it's a equipment rental company that's kind of a nationally owned company. And so I think, kind of the upshot of all of this was really just that there's not a lot of available capital from what we can tell. And business owners, are really not making upgrades to their buildings. And when they do, those upgrades often are, the lowest cost option and don't necessarily make much headway in terms of improving efficiency, improving kind of the climate mitigation and resilience potential of these buildings, or in reducing operating costs, really drastically. And so the goal for us was really to begin to think about how do we change that? How do we start engaging with others? And before we move into kind of that last piece, I'm going to turn it over to Shanti to talk a little bit more about some of the kind of equipment level recommendations and findings that we came up with.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Will. If you go to the next slide. Well, your audio is a little garbled there, so at the end, I'm not sure if your mic is losing battery or what, but hopefully mine's a little better. But yeah, so Shanti Pless, I'm a researcher here at NREL, and had an opportunity to try to understand the tools and the data that exist to support, taking those 400 commercial buildings, what we know about them, their size, their building type when they're built, and get some more insights into how they use energy or strategies we might be able to do a deeper dive in. And so to do that, we used a tool called Comstock that allows us to get a sense of energy use intensity by end uses that are mapped to statistical representations of the existing building stock throughout counties in the United States. And so that allowed us to get a better sense of, with that data that we know of the 400 buildings and their size and their building type, a better sense of warehouse is their primary building type, but maybe they're not necessarily the biggest energy user. So if you go to the next slide there, by mapping the existing buildings, the database of those buildings with the statistical representation of data of how those buildings use energy from Comstock, we were able to put some real numbers to estimate. The smaller subset of retail actually are pretty significantly larger than the primary building type in the district of warehouse. So that got us thinking a little bit more about why that might be. And if you go to the next slide, further understanding of the detailed breakdown of end uses, right, in that retail, and recognizing that better sense of end uses as we get into developing specific recommendations. If we're trying to, focus on lighting in warehouses, maybe that's not necessarily the first place to start. Maybe we need to be focused more on refrigeration and or in rooftop retrofits in the retail that obviously from the permit data are somewhat original, right? And so go to the next slide. The Comstock data set also has a statistical representation based on the type of building, the age of the building, and such. That gives us a sense of the type of systems that we're dealing with, so that we can get a sense of the type of contractors that may be necessary to retrofit these types of systems, or the supply chain network that maybe are within the district that can service these units. So packaged single zone AC with gas coil, the PSC AC is the predominant system type there. So any program to address the primary energy user focused on that system type is a good place to start, based on this high level statistical representation of the buildings and their square footage and types within the district is kind of the key takeaway there. Next slide. Will, did you want me to go through some of these as well? I think there's also a whole host of strategies that just from that basic information that we're able to then at least put forward for consideration.
Yeah, sure. I'll touch on a couple things pretty high level. I think one of the surprising things that we found was that even though warehouses are kind of the dominant form of commercial building and have by far the most floor space, in terms of energy use, they're actually not the worst. Retail is. And so, when we're thinking about how do we improve kind of the energy profile of the building stock in Marvin's district, I think, the conclusion that left out to us after that is that retail really needs to be a key focus. Certainly there are some opportunities in warehouses and other building types, but, just given the high energy use intensity that we see in the retail buildings in Martin's district, I think, we kind of concluded that was a great starting point in order to start having some of these conversations with business owners and others about the benefits of EE and some of the incentives that might be able to reduce costs for building owners, kind of in the long term. And so you can see some of the recommendations that we had here. I'm not going to go through them in a ton of detail, and there's a lot of text on the slide. But in terms of component level savings, we found that lighting, interior equipment powered by natural gas, kind of upgrading all of that, electric fans, interior equipment, and then cooling, those were kind of the biggest energy users in retail buildings. And there could be, kind of key savings potential through upgrading those to more highly efficient technologies. The same goes for refrigeration equipment, which was another kind of major user, particularly in kind of buildings oriented around food service. HVAC units, there's been very little done to HVAC units and very little kind of re-roofing activity in the district, and because those are pretty big energy loads and the equipment is decades old for the most part, kind of RTU upgrades and more efficient HVAC equipment, is a key need. And then, re-roofing. There's only been 10 commercial buildings in the district that have been re-roofed in the past 10 years. And so, there are a lot of aging roofs, and, kind of in that process, adding insulation and making the roof highly reflective is a way to kind of increase efficiency through that. And, I think also pave the way for rooftop solar or something like that, that can, kind of drastically reduce, energy bills in the long term. Some similar, upgrades I think available for other commercial buildings, like storage warehouses. And if you go to the next slide, we also looked at hotels. There's a number of hotels in the district, and again, I think the conclusions are pretty similar. It's upgrading specific equipment that we see driving energy costs and energy usage, and I think this is a key moment to do that, given incentives that are on the table and other opportunities that we're seeing through, local utilities and other, kind of other commercial building networks. And so, yeah, I think I'll kind of wrap up there. And I don't know, am I turning it back over to you, Marvin, to talk kind of about the final, engagement piece?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned at the outset, so where does this all lead us? As you see, it is very clear that in the absence of benchmarking, it will require what we are doing now, which is engaging building owners and tenants to really understand the value of energy efficiency. And like I said, we're doing that right now. We're doing that in a variety of different ways. We mentioned we are working with the community improvement district and presenting in front of them, and that is going to get us, that has gotten us in front of a lot of owners. But what the purpose of this was again to take it from here, you recognize in a general broad sense that there are opportunities. Here's a bunch of resources for that, to be able to tailor it to the specific building type and the specific industry, so that we can more intelligently make recommendations rather than inundating them with useful information, but that they have not been, again, in our experience so far, been able to kind of wade through. Because I'm being very realistic, because we don't have a leader or two in the area in clean energy and efficiency. No one is yet leading by example. So we are having to convince those individual owners and tenants to be able to do that. I think we have seen some, I know we have seen some, again, we've gotten a lot further because we have started to do that and been able to make it more specific, again, to the building type, the property type. Of course, we're also, certainly in my policymaking hat, hoping to use this information to help move along the possibilities of benchmarking and improvements. We have, for example, through pushing for a number of years on my part, gotten the county level to adopt, international property maintenance code to the most updated level. So there will be other opportunities for that, but I do think that as in many aspects, I would predict that the private sector will have to lead the way, and then the government, at least the county government, will come in later. So the way that we're also trying to do that is not just go individually by building owner and property owner and tenant, but again, on a more aggregate level, really convening local building owners and tenants and connecting them directly to those that might provide those services. Of course, Georgia Power is the biggest one, and we, through this process, have spoken to them. But also, as I mentioned, also in my part of the presentation, we have a huge construction industry and manufacturing industry here. While we work to train those in some of the technology and certification, et cetera, there are those that are already doing that in central heating and air conditioning, in lighting, in solar. We're hoping to make that as local as possible, so as to, again, kind of lower that barrier to entry, make it more concrete for folks, rather than just, again, this broad idea. So that's where we are, and we're very hopeful that with this level of specificity and proactivity, that we will get a lot further along than we had been in really the last 10 years. Will and Shanti, anything to add to what I said?
Yeah, this is Shanti here at Enron. I mean, you look at the warehouse districts across the United States, and oftentimes you think, as a commercial solar developer, you might think, perfect place for solar, but there are none in this district, right? And so it's definitely takes the next step into understanding why and how to to streamline that process and get started in that direction. So it's yeah. Cool. Next slide. Do we have? There we go.
Thank you all so much, and thank you for talking through the community's priorities and how Expert Match specifically was able to support some of the priorities and the ongoing work happening there. So quickly kind of on applying to C2C on the next slide, we have a QR code and we'll probably share these slides after the call. So if you're not able to scan the code right now, after the call, you can scan the code and it takes you to the Expert Match website and application. It takes less than 20 minutes to fill that application. Your application gives us a sense of kind of what your high level question is, if there are any upcoming decisions you're working towards, and it also helps us find the right expert for your request. So at this juncture, we'll transition to the Q&A session. I know we have about 10 minutes left. And so if you have any questions, please put up your hand virtually, and then we'll kind of talk through your questions. I know there was one that came in, and Anna, I think we can stop sharing slides now. Thank you. So there was one question, is the Comstock analysis, is it part of the technical assistance program? I think this kind of points to a question of, is it pre-run analysis you're using or is it new analysis you're doing Comstock-wise? Shanti.
So utilizing the data that comes out of Comstock was definitely part of the technical analysis. We're mapping the data that has been run in Comstock to the specific building types and building characteristics that we have from the 400 commercial buildings within unincorporated Norcross. And so it's that's how we've been using the Comstock data sets for specific, and it was in the middle of the development of Comstock. So since this analysis has been done, there's additional runs that have been completed that that look at energy savings from various common strategies that are available now. So recognizing that that was a need and of interest, and those data sets now are available going forward as well for everyone else to use.
Great, thank you, Shanti. And so yes, if you have questions, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature, and we'll get to them. So one thing I want to highlight as we wait for additional questions is that this expert match request was an example of kind of a joint TA approach we're using under expert match. So here, Shanti was the expert from NREL and Will was the expert from SIA, and it really helped us complement NREL's deep technical modeling and analysis experience with SIA's analysis experience as well, but also the really local context they bring to the table that we don't quite have, often sitting in Colorado. So depending on the request, especially the buildings related request, we are offering this joint TA approach in terms of who provides that technical assistance.
And see, I'll just add to that. The barrier to entry to this program was particularly low. That is something that was very attractive to us. I think it took us less than 20 minutes. That might be the average, but I really appreciated that. Of course, we had again previously done the work and were able to own in on a specific question. But I think the actual application itself was a very low barrier to entry. And to the previous question, that's something that I wondered myself. I think in a perfect world, I brought it up in one of our calls, I believe, a long time ago. I thought, well, Georgia Power probably has a lot of this data, at least in the energy efficiency realm. Can they do more to be proactive in having that data and reaching out to those that might be able to achieve savings, et cetera, et cetera? Of course, that's probably not the most realistic. Maybe in other jurisdictions, you might work with utilities, et cetera, that do that. But the next best thing I found was pairing the Comstock data with the data we were able to get at the county level as to what has already been done. And again, really granular kind of geospatial analysis. I think then pairing that, and again, I mentioned we talked to Georgia Power, that is part of it. So they're not necessarily going to proactively reach out to their customers, but we at least have formed that relationship, strengthen that relationship with Georgia Power so that when we identify those opportunities, what we are doing is to, again, make it a little bit more actualizable, if that's a word, for these tenants and property owners by saying, talk to Georgia Power. We have the modeling, we have what's already been pulled, but you can talk to them, and here's the partnership that we've created. So that's our hope moving forward will be kind of the next best thing to actualize data in my district.
Great, thanks, Marvin. And so with that example, and thinking about that example, I know we got another question from John Hopkins about for communities interested in participating, we invite you to go to the Expert Match website, and we can definitely, where you can submit an application, but there's also the email for this program there, and it's c2cexpertmatch@nrl.gov. And if you reach out to us over email and or through submitting the application, we can definitely meet with you one-on-one to get a better sense of what your request is, and go from there. Okay, so there's another question about now more about the private sector. So what, if any, roles do private sector technical consultants play in any of the three programs? And I partially answered this question. So we, at this point, have two organizations helping to provide that kind of local context for the building specific requests. So that's SIA, and then another organization as well on the building side. And then on the transportation mobility side may not be as relevant to most of those on the call today, but for every request that is transportation related, we're also trying to work with local clean cities coalitions, which are partners across the country that provide assistance to communities trying to develop clean mobility programs or projects. We work with them to deliver transportation related requests for Expert Match. And then with cohorts, there's also one or two entities they're working with, but overall, majority of the assistance is being provided by the national labs. So there's another question on, do we have any recommendations in terms of engaging, when to engage with C2C, whether it's through Expert Match or with cohorts? So Expert Match has a rolling application. So you can submit an application at any time throughout the year. Cohorts and in-depth partnerships do run on the calendar, like a stricter schedule. So with cohorts, I mentioned the applications will open towards the end of September to launch in January. And with in-depth technical partnerships, round one, communities will be announced in the next few weeks, but the next kind of set of in-depth partnerships, applications for that will likely open next year. So all of these are opportunities for engagement, but if you have a near-term decision, Expert Match might be the first point of entry for you. And again, we're happy to meet with you to get a better sense of what your request is. Thanks, Anna. And this slide is just our contact information if you want to reach out to each and any of us directly. Myself, Alex, Shanti, William, and Marvin, of course, feel free to send us an email if you have any specific questions. I know we have about 3 minutes left kind of in the official time for this. Does anyone have any final thoughts, any last things they'd like to share before we wrap up? So a lot of smiles, and I think everyone is good. Just want to say again a big thank you for everyone that was able to join the call today. Thank you for listening and hearing more about C2C, the program, and the work we've done with Unincorporated Norcross. Reach out to us if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, if just any feedback at all on the program as well. We're always open to hearing better ways we can be working with communities across the country. And on that note, everyone enjoy the rest of your day. We hope to be in touch soon, and we hope to actually come back for some more Better Buildings webinars. So thank you to the Better Buildings team for working with us on this webinar today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.